Because I suggested we change the venue for our annual family Christmas gathering, my grandson Marcus erupted at me. "Grandma, this is my house and my rules now. If you can't accept that, maybe you shouldn't come at all this year." My daughter, Heather, stood silently by his side, avoiding my eyes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I watched as 50 years of unconditional love and financial support meant absolutely nothing in that moment. 2 weeks later, while they were decorating their Christmas tree without me, I was sipping coconut water on a pristine Balinese beach, my new friends toasting to my freedom. The look on their faces when they discovered I'd emptied my accounts was worth every penny of my 5-star villa. The tension had been building for months. Ever since Marcus and his wife Olivia had purchased their sprawling suburban home with the substantial down payment I'd provided as a gift, family gatherings had become exercises in tiptoeing around their egos. The house, with its marble countertops and vaulted ceilings, had transformed my once humble grandson into someone I barely recognized. It was early November when I made what I thought was a simple suggestion. We were sitting around their dining table after Sunday lunch, discussing the upcoming Christmas plans. "I was thinking," I said carefully, setting down my water glass, "that we might consider hosting Christmas at the Willows this year." The Willows was my home of 43 years, the place where generations of our family had celebrated holidays before Marcus declared his house the new family headquarters. Marcus's fork clattered against his plate. "Grandma Eleanor, we've been over this. My house has the space we need. The children have the game room. There's the home theater for after dinner. And frankly, the Willows is—" He paused, exchanging glances with my daughter. "A bit outdated. For entertaining. I've hosted Christmas dinners for 30 people in that house," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Your grandfather and I built extra tables by hand when necessary." Olivia gave a thin smile. "That's sweet, Eleanor, but times change. Plus, the drive to your place adds an extra hour for most of the family." What she didn't say, what nobody acknowledged, was that ever since my husband Thomas passed away 3 years ago, they'd been systematically removing me from family decisions. First, it was gentle suggestions that I might find hosting too stressful. Then it became outright takeovers of holidays, birthday celebrations, even casual family gatherings. "Well," I persisted, "I've been renovating the sunroom. It's quite lovely now with views of the garden. I thought it might be nice for everyone to—" "Renovating?" Marcus interrupted, his tone suddenly sharp. "You mean you hired contractors?" "Mom said you were watching your expenses." My daughter's head snapped up. "Mother, we talked about this. With property taxes going up and your pension only covering the basics, major renovations aren't practical right now." I felt heat rising to my cheeks. At 72, I was being scolded about money by the very people who had benefited most from my lifetime of careful saving. The renovation had cost a fraction of what I'd given Marcus for his down payment, a gift he'd apparently forgotten. "It wasn't major," I said. "And it's my money, Heather." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Olivia busied herself clearing plates, while their children, Emma and Jackson, exchanged glances. Even at 10 and 12, they sensed the tension. Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice as if speaking to someone infirm. "Grandma, we're just concerned. Mom's been helping manage your finances for a reason. At your age, it's easy to make impulsive decisions. My age." Those 2 words carried so much condescension, so much dismissal of my capabilities. I'd managed a successful accounting practice for 35 years, built a substantial investment portfolio, and put both my children through college without debt. But now, apparently, I couldn't be trusted to hire a contractor. "Perhaps we should discuss this another time," I said, reaching for my purse. "I should be going." No, Marcus insisted, his tone shifting to something artificially bright. Let's settle the Christmas plans now. We're thinking of catering this year. That upscale Italian place. Of course, we'd love if you'd make your apple pie. That's your special touch. And there it was. My role reduced to a single dessert in a celebration I had once orchestrated from start to finish. A token contribution to preserve the illusion of my importance. Actually, I said, surprising myself with my steadiness, I was thinking of trying something different this year, maybe a traditional English trifle instead. Marcus's smile faltered. But everyone expects your apple pie. It's tradition. Traditions evolve, don't they? Isn't that what you just told me? His face darkened, and I saw a flash of the temper he'd inherited from his father. This is exactly why we need to keep things simple, Grandma. You're becoming difficult. Difficult? I echoed. Yes, difficult. First the renovation, now changing. Recipes everyone loves. It's like you're deliberately trying to upset our holidays. I stood up, gathering my dignity. I think I'll head home now. Mom, sit down, Heather said. Marcus doesn't mean anything by it. But Marcus wasn't finished. He stood as well, color rising to his face. Actually, I do mean it. This is my house, and my rules now. If you can't accept that, maybe you shouldn't come at all this year. The room fell silent. Emma's eyes widened, and Jackson suddenly found his lap fascinating. Heather's mouth opened, but no words came out. Olivia froze in the doorway to the kitchen, plates in hand. I looked at my grandson, this man I had rocked to sleep as an infant, whose college education I had funded, whose wedding I had helped pay for, and saw only a stranger consumed by his own importance. I see, I said quietly. I picked up my handbag and cardigan. Then I won't. As I walked to my car, I heard Heather calling after me, her voice caught between loyalty to her son and duty to her mother. I didn't turn around. Something had crystallized inside me, a realization that had been forming for years but had finally, painfully, become clear. This was no longer my family. Or rather, I was no longer permitted to be more than an accessory within it. That night, as I sat alone in my outdated living room, surrounded by photographs of a life devoted to family, I made a decision. It wasn't impulsive, as Marcus would have characterized it. It was perhaps the most carefully considered choice I had made in decades. By Christmas, everything would change, and this time, I wouldn't be asking anyone's permission. The morning after, that disastrous Sunday lunch, I woke before dawn, a lifetime habit that hadn't faded with retirement. For a moment, as the first pale light filtered through my curtains, I could almost pretend Thomas was still beside me, preparing for our morning ritual of coffee on the porch, watching the neighborhood come to life. But the space beside me had been empty for 3 years. The king-sized bed that once felt just right now seemed vast and cold. I pulled on my robe, the cashmere one Thomas had given me for our 40th anniversary, and made my way downstairs to the kitchen. The Willows was silent, except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from my parents that had marked the hours of our lives for nearly 5 decades. As I waited for the coffee to brew, I gazed out at my garden. November had stripped the trees bare, but there was beauty in their stark silhouettes against the brightening sky. Thomas and I had planted many of them together. The oak when Heather was born, the maple for our son Michael's arrival 3 years later. Michael now lived in Seattle, visiting only on major holidays, his life consumed by his tech career and growing family. The sunroom renovation that had sparked yesterday's confrontation gleamed at the edge of my vision. A space I'd updated not out of extravagance but practicality. The old windows had been drafty, the furniture faded from decades of sun. It was an investment in my comfort, in the home I intended to live in until I could no longer manage the stairs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The coffee maker beeped, and I poured a cup, adding a splash of cream, a small luxury I still allowed myself. Carrying it to my study, I settled at the desk where I'd managed our family finances for decades. Thomas had been brilliant with people, but hopeless with money. "You're the numbers wizard," he'd always said, kissing the top of my head as I balanced checkbooks and planned investments. The irony wasn't lost on me. After a career as an accountant and a lifetime of prudent financial management, I was now considered incapable of handling my own affairs. I opened my laptop and logged into my banking portal. Despite what Heather and Marcus believed, I was still perfectly capable of managing my finances. In fact, I'd been quietly monitoring the access logs to my accounts since Heather had insisted on having my passwords, just in case. She checked. The balance is weekly, I noticed, though she never mentioned it. My financial situation was considerably healthier than they assumed. Thomas and I had lived well below our means for most of our marriage, investing consistently through market ups and downs. My accounting practice had been profitable, and I'd sold it for a handsome sum when I retired at 65. The house was paid off, and my pension, combined with Social Security and investment income, provided more than enough for my modest needs. What my family didn't know, what I'd never felt the need to disclose, was the extent of those investments, or the substantial life insurance policy Thomas had left, or the trust my own parents had established, which had grown steadily over the years. I wasn't wealthy by modern standards, but I was far from the financially vulnerable widow they seemed to believe me to be. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Heather's name flashed on the screen. "Good morning, dear," I answered, keeping my tone light. "Mom, I'm so sorry about yesterday," she began without preamble. "Marcus feels terrible. He didn't mean what he said." "Did he tell you that?" I asked quietly. A pause. "Well, no, but I know he didn't mean it. He's just stressed about work and Olivia's mother is coming for Thanksgiving, and you know how that goes." I did know. Olivia's mother, Vivian, was a force of nature who criticized everything from Olivia's parenting to Marcus's career choices. The irony of them accommodating Vivian's demands while dismissing mine wasn't lost on me. "It's all right, Heather," I said. "Perhaps it's for the best. I've been thinking I might do something different for Christmas this year anyway." "Different?" Her voice sharpened. "What do you mean?" "Just considering my options," I replied vaguely. "Maybe a change of scenery." "Mom, you can't miss Christmas. The kids would be devastated." Her tone made it clear which kids she meant. Emma and Jackson, not her 36-year-old son who had just uninvited me from the family gathering. "We'll see," I said. "How are the children, by the way?" Allowing her to shift into updates about my grandchildren's activities gave me space to think. This pattern had become so familiar. A confrontation, followed by Heather smoothing things over without actually addressing the underlying issues, followed by my quiet acquiescence for the sake of family peace. It had begun after Thomas died. The first holiday without him, I'd been still numb with grief. Heather and Marcus had taken over, gently but firmly pushing me into the role of passive guest rather than host. At the time, I'd been grateful for their help. I wasn't ready to face the empty chair at the head of the table, but their temporary assistance had calcified into permanent control. Each family gathering saw me further sidelined, my recipes replaced, my traditions altered, my preferences overlooked. The apple pie was the last vestige of my holiday influence, and now that was a source of contention. "Mom, are you listening?" Heather's voice cut through my thoughts. "I'm sorry, dear." "What was that?" I said, "Why don't you come over for dinner tonight? Just us. Marcus and Olivia are taking the kids to some school function. We can talk about Christmas." "That sounds lovely," I heard myself say. The path of least resistance, as always. After we hung up, I remained at my desk, staring at the family photo that served as my computer's background. All of us at Thomas's 70th birthday, his arm around my shoulders, our children and grandchildren, gathered close, smiles wide and seemingly genuine. Had things changed after his death? Or had I simply been too consumed by our partnership to notice the shifting dynamics? Thomas had been our family's center of gravity, his gentle authority keeping everyone in respectful orbit. Without him, those relationships had wobbled, then reorganized with me increasingly at the periphery. My gaze drifted to the small cabinet, where I kept important documents. Inside was a folder labeled Travel Dreams, a collection of brochures and printouts Thomas and I had gathered over the years. Places we'd planned to visit in our retirement, adventures we'd postponed while raising children and building careers. Bali had been at the top of Thomas's list. Imagine, he'd said, eyes crinkling with that smile I adored, waking up to the sound of the ocean, eating exotic fruits for breakfast, exploring ancient temples. We'd never made it there. His heart attack had come suddenly, in the garden he loved, while I was inside preparing lunch. By the time I found him, it was too late. I reached for the folder, fingers trembling slightly as I opened it. The glossy images seemed to shimmer with possibility. White sand beaches, terraced rice, fields, ornate temples, Thomas's neat handwriting in the margins. Eleanor would love this resort, and must try this restaurant. Something stirred in my chest. Not grief, which had become a familiar companion, but something sharper, more insistent. A voice that sounded remarkably like Thomas's. Live, Eleanor. You've earned it. That evening's dinner with Heather began pleasantly enough. She'd ordered from my favorite Mediterranean restaurant, a peace offering wrapped in warm pita and tzatziki sauce. We sat at her kitchen island, the sleek marble countertop dotted with small containers of hummus, baba ganoush, and tabbouleh. Emma made honor roll again, Heather said, refilling my water glass. And Jackson's soccer team is headed to regionals. Marcus is coaching, you know. I nodded, smiling at the appropriate moments, asking the right questions. This was the script. We followed, surface-level updates, careful avoidance of anything contentious. That's wonderful, I said. They're growing up so fast. Too fast, Heather agreed. Which reminds me, we need to start planning Jackson's birthday party. It's right after New Year's, and he wants something with his soccer friends. The casual "we" didn't escape my notice. Once I would have been consulted about my grandson's celebration, perhaps asked to help with preparations. Now, I was merely being informed. I was thinking, Heather continued, her tone deliberately casual, about your sunroom renovation. Marcus mentioned it was quite extensive. And there it was, the real purpose of this dinner. Not reconciliation, but reconnaissance. It wasn't particularly extensive, I replied, taking a small bite of dolma. Just updated windows for better insulation, new furniture, and some paint. The contractor was very reasonable. Still, it must have been expensive. I worry about you dipping into your principal, Mom. Your fixed income needs to last. I set down my fork. Heather, I appreciate your concern, but my finances are quite secure. She reached across the counter to pat my hand, a gesture both condescending and familiar. I know you think that, but these days, everything costs more than you expect. Look at Marcus and Olivia. They both have good jobs, and they still struggle. With their mortgage sometimes. Their mortgage on a 4,500 square foot house with a swimming pool, I observed mildly. Her expression tightened momentarily. They work hard. They deserve nice things. As do I replied. The sunroom makes me happy. It's where I read, where I watch the birds. It's my space. Of course, she backpedaled. I just want to make sure you're thinking long-term. What if you need assisted living someday? What if there's a major medical expense? What she didn't say, what hovered unspoken between us, was that my financial security was intertwined with her own expectations. My money was, in her mind, the family safety net, a resource to be preserved, not for my enjoyment, but for future contingencies that primarily concerned them. I have long-term care insurance, I reminded her. And I'm still in excellent health, according to Dr. Patterson. I softened my tone. Heather, I raised you to be responsible with money. I taught you to save for emergencies, to invest wisely. I've always tried to model financial prudence. I know, Mom, she said, busying herself with clearing our plates. It's just that things are different now. The economy, healthcare costs, the kids' college funds. Marcus and I worry about having enough for everything. As she loaded the dishwasher, I noticed a shopping bag on the counter from an upscale department store. The edge of a shoebox peeked out, designer label clearly visible. New shoes? I asked casually. Heather's cheeks flushed slightly. Just a pair of boots for winter. They were on sale. The same Heather who worried about my sunroom renovation, apparently, had no qualms about designer boots. The double standard was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. About Christmas, she said, changing the subject as she brought out baklava for dessert. I think you should reconsider. Marcus was just having a bad day. The family wouldn't be the same without you. I'll think about it, I said non-committally. Her phone chimed. She glanced at it, then frowned. It's Olivia. The school event ended early, and they're on their way home. I thought we'd have more time. More time for what? To further interrogate me about my finances? To convince me to fall back in line with the family hierarchy they'd established? Before I could respond, the front door opened. I heard Emma's voice. First. But Mom said I could. Followed by Marcus's deeper tone, firm and unyielding. They spilled into the kitchen, a whirlwind of backpacks and jackets. Emma froze when she saw me, then rushed over for a hug. Grandma! I didn't know you'd be here. Hello, sweetheart, I said, embracing her. At 13, she was already nearly my height, her features a perfect blend of our family's characteristics. I hear you made honor roll again. I'm so proud of you. Jackson gave me a more reserved greeting. At 10, he was entering that phase where demonstrative affection was embarrassing. Still, he allowed me to ruffle his hair. Marcus and Olivia hung back, their discomfort palpable. Marcus nodded stiffly, in my direction. Eleanor, he said, using my first name, a habit he'd adopted recently that felt like a deliberate erasure of our relationship. Didn't expect to see you here. Mom invited me for dinner, I explained unnecessarily. An awkward silence fell. Olivia busied herself with the children's backpacks while Marcus opened the refrigerator, studying its contents with unwarranted intensity. I was just leaving, I said, standing and gathering my purse. It's getting late. But we just got here, Emma protested. Can't you stay a little longer? I want to tell you about my science project. Another time, sweetheart, I promised. How about you come over this weekend? You could help me plant some bulbs for spring. Marcus cleared his throat. Actually, this weekend is packed. Emma has dance on Saturday morning, then we're looking at private schools for next year. Sunday is meal prep and family time. Family. Time that apparently doesn't include me. I thought but didn't say. Maybe next weekend then, I suggested. Emma's face fell. But the science fair is next Friday. I wanted to practice my presentation with you. I'm sure Mom can help you with that, Marcus interjected. She was a science teacher, after all. For elementary school, Heather corrected. And I taught general education, not specifically science. Still, Marcus insisted, it makes more sense for family to handle these things internally. There it was again, that subtle redrawing of boundaries. Family now meant their nuclear unit. I was becoming an outsider, a visitor granted occasional access. I should go, I repeated, kissing Emma and Jackson goodbye. Thank you for dinner, Heather. As I gathered my things, I overheard Marcus in the kitchen, his voice low but not quite low enough. Did you talk to her about the finances? Did she say anything about changing her will after that renovation stunt? My hands stilled on my coat buttons. Will? They were concerned about my will? Heather shushed him urgently, but the damage was done. I finished buttoning my coat with deliberate slowness, my mind racing. This wasn't just about control or disrespect. They were actively monitoring my spending with an eye toward their future inheritance. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, yet it struck like a physical blow. All these years I'd believed I was building a legacy of love and security for my family. Instead, it seemed I'd been cultivating expectations and entitlement. "Mom, I'll walk you out," Heather said, appearing suddenly beside me, her face composed, as if nothing had happened. At my car, she hugged me perfunctorily. "Think about Christmas, okay? The kids would be heartbroken if you weren't there." I smiled thinly. As I said, "I'll consider it." As I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, past houses already displaying early Christmas decorations, something hardened inside me. The mental calculus I'd always done, putting family needs before my own, accepting slights for the sake of harmony, suddenly seemed like a poor investment. Back at the Willows, I brewed a cup of tea and carried it to my sunroom. Night had fallen, transforming the windows into black mirrors that reflected my solitary figure. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly see the woman looking back at me, not as a grandmother or widow or mother, but as Eleanor Webb, aged 72 with perhaps 15 or 20 good years left. Maybe less. How many of those precious years was I willing to sacrifice to people who saw me primarily as a financial resource and occasional babysitter? I pulled out my phone and opened the photo gallery. Buried several screens deep was an album, labeled Thomas, Private. Inside were pictures I'd taken during our last anniversary trip to the coast. Thomas laughing on the beach, his silver hair tousled by wind. Thomas raising a glass at dinner, eyes crinkling with joy. Thomas sleeping peacefully beside me, morning light gentle on his beloved face. "What would you do?" I whispered to his image. "If you could see how things have changed?" The answer came, with such clarity that I almost heard his voice. "I'd want you to be happy, Ellie, whatever that looks like." I set down my tea and opened my laptop. The travel folder lay beside it, its contents spilling out like possibilities. On impulse, I typed Bali Christmas vacation into the search bar. Dozens of results appeared. Luxury villas, beachfront resorts, cultural tours. Places where Christmas meant sunshine and new experiences, not tense dinners and carefully monitored behavior. My finger hovered over the trackpad. One click, and I could begin a journey that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with choice. I clicked. 2 weeks after my dinner with Heather, I was trimming roses in my garden when Emma called. My granddaughter rarely phoned me directly. Our communication usually filtered through Heather, or happened during supervised family gatherings. Hearing her teenage voice, slightly breathless with excitement, warmed me instantly. "Grandma? Guess what?" "I got the highest grade on my history presentation, the one about women's suffrage that you helped me research." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, setting down my garden shears and sitting on the wrought iron bench Thomas had given me for our 30th anniversary. "I knew you'd do brilliantly." Mrs. Patterson said my primary sources were exceptional. I told her my grandma helped me find real letters from suffragettes in the Historical Society archives. Pride bloomed in my chest. The weekend we'd spent at the library together had been one of the few times Marcus and Olivia had allowed Emma to stay with me overnight in recent months. We'd pored over fragile documents, me teaching her to handle them with proper care, explaining the context behind the passionate words of women fighting for their fundamental rights. "I'm so proud of you for taking that project seriously," I told her. "Those women's stories deserve to be remembered." That's what I said in my conclusion. She paused, then continued more hesitantly. "Grandma, I was wondering, could I come over this weekend? Dad's taking Jackson to some father-son camping thing with his buddies, and Mom's going to Aunt Lisa's bachelorette weekend. They said I'd stay with the Petersons next door, but I'd rather be with you." My heart leapt, then immediately constricted. Oh, Emma, I'd love that, but… Has your father approved this plan? Her silence answered my question. I thought if I asked first, then told them you already said yes, she admitted. Sweetheart, you know I can't undermine your parents' decisions. But it's not fair. Emma's voice cracked with teenage indignation. I'm 13, not a baby. I should get to choose where I stay when they're gone. And it's not like you're a stranger. You're my grandmother. I know, love, but your parents make the rules. Emma's frustration bubbled over. It's Jackson's fault. He told Dad you let him have soda when he stayed over last time, and now Dad says you disregard their parental guidelines or whatever. I suppressed a sigh. One small cup of ginger ale when Jackson had a stomachache, a remedy my own mother had used, transformed into evidence of my unsuitability. I'm sorry about that, I said carefully. Perhaps I should have checked first. It's not about the stupid soda, Emma continued. Dad and Mom had this huge fight last night about money and Christmas and you. My pruning shears lay forgotten, beside me as I focused entirely on my granddaughter's words. What about me, Emma? She hesitated. I probably shouldn't tell you this. It's all right, I assured her, keeping my voice calm despite my racing heart. You can tell me anything. Dad was yelling about how you're being financially irresponsible and squandering their inheritance. Mom tried to defend you, but then… Dad showed her something on his phone, bank statements or something, and said you'd booked expensive travel recently. My breath caught. I had indeed made several significant transactions in the past week. A deposit on a beachfront villa in Bali, first-class airfare, travel insurance. But how could Marcus know that? Unless Heather was monitoring my accounts more closely than I realized. Then Dad said something really mean, Emma continued, her voice dropping. He said they should have gotten power of attorney after Grandpa died, that now you're just burning through money they were counting on for our college and their retirement. The words struck like slaps. Not just the entitled assumption that my money was rightfully theirs, but the calculated coldness of it, planning to take legal control of my finances while my grief was still raw. Then it got weird, Emma said. Dad started talking about Christmas, saying now they need to play nice and act like they didn't uninvite you, because they need to stay in your good graces until they figure out what you're doing with your money. So that was why Heather had been calling daily, voice honeyed with concern, inviting me to family dinners and asking about my Christmas plans. Not reconciliation, damage control. Grandma? Are you still there? Yes, sweetheart, I managed. I'm just taking in what you've told me. Are you mad? I shouldn't have said anything, right? Mom's always telling me I talk too much. No, Emma. I'm grateful for your honesty. And I'm not mad at you. Not at all. Good, because there's more. She lowered her voice further. After the fight, I heard Dad on the phone with Uncle Michael. He was explaining some plan about getting you to sign over the Willows to them before you waste all your assets on frivolous expenses. He said they could let you live there until you need care, but the house should be in their names for estate. Planning purposes. The Willows. My home. The place where I'd raised my children, loved my husband, planted gardens and hosted celebrations and weathered storms both literal and figurative. The repository of 5 decades of memories, sacred in its familiarity. They wanted me to sign it over, to surrender my sanctuary for their financial convenience. Dad said they need to move fast because you're acting erratic since Grandpa died. He told Uncle Michael they're worried about your mental competence. Emma's voice wavered. But that's not true, Grandma. You're the sanest person I know. A strange calm settled over me as the pieces clicked into place. The increased scrutiny of my spending, the concerned questions about my activities, the subtle tests of my memory during conversations. They weren't just monitoring me, they were building a case. Emma, does your father know you're calling me? No. I'm using my friend Zoe's phone. Mine has parental controls. She paused. I'm scared, Grandma. Not of you, of how they're talking about you, like you're a problem to solve instead of a person. Out of the mouths of babes. My 13-year-old granddaughter had articulated exactly what I'd been feeling. You don't need to be afraid, I assured. Her, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm perfectly fine, and I can handle whatever comes. But what if they try to take the Willows? What if they stop me from seeing you? A legitimate concern. If Marcus and Heather believed I was spending their inheritance, they might indeed restrict my access to my grandchildren as punishment. Emma, listen to me. Whatever happens between me and your parents, my love for you and Jackson will never change. We might not see each other as often as we'd like, but I will always be your grandmother. She sniffled. Promise? With all my heart. We talked a few minutes more before Emma had to go. After we hung up, I remained on the garden bench, surrounded by the roses Thomas and I had planted together, the reality of my situation crystallizing with painful clarity. My own children saw me as a failing asset to be managed, not as a person with autonomy and dreams. They were actively conspiring to limit my independence under the guise of protection, and they were willing to use access to my grandchildren as leverage to control my financial decisions. I looked up at the willows, its familiar silhouette against the afternoon sky. This house had sheltered my family through every season of life. I'd always assumed it would continue to be a gathering place even after I was gone, a repository of family history and shared experiences. But perhaps holding on to that vision meant sacrificing whatever life I had left. I thought of the villa in Bali, a place of new beginnings, where Thomas and I had dreamed of watching sunrises together, of all the other destinations in our travel folder, waiting to be explored, of the years slipping away while I carefully managed my family's expectations. The revelation wasn't just about their betrayal, it was about the life that was still possible, if I chose myself for once. I stood, brushing garden soil from my hands with deliberate care. Inside, on my desk, sat the folder containing all my travel arrangements, alongside estate planning documents I'd been reviewing with increasing unease. It was time to make some changes. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake in the darkness, Emma's revelations echoing in my mind. The grandfather clock in the hallway marked each passing hour with solemn chimes that seemed to ask, "What will you do now?" Around 3 a.m, I gave up trying to sleep. Wrapping my robe around me, I padded downstairs to the kitchen. The house creaked and settled around me, familiar sounds that had once been comforting but now felt like whispered warnings. I made a cup of chamomile tea and carried it to Thomas's study, a room I'd preserved almost exactly as he'd left it. His reading glasses still rested on the desk beside the biography he'd been halfway through when his heart failed him. His cardigan hung on the back of the leather chair, as if he might return any moment to slip it on against the evening chill. Sank into his chair, inhaling the faint scent of his aftershave that somehow lingered. "What would you do?" I whispered to the empty room. Thomas had always been the family peacekeeper. He'd smooth over conflicts, find compromises, keep everyone talking. But he'd also been fiercely protective of me. Would he advocate patience and understanding now? Or would he recognize this as a fundamental breach of trust? I opened his desk drawer and pulled out our estate planning binder. Inside were wills, powers of attorney, advance directives, all the documents we'd carefully prepared to ensure our wishes would be respected and our family provided for. The irony wasn't lost on me. We'd structured everything to benefit Heather and Michael equally, with trusts for the grandchildren's education. We'd been transparent about our plans, hoping to prevent exactly the kind of family conflict that now loomed. Yet here I was, contemplating significant changes to those carefully laid plans. If I altered my will or trusts, it would confirm their accusations of erratic behavior. If I proceeded with my Bali plans, they might escalate their efforts to control my finances. If I confronted them directly, they would simply deny everything, paint me as confused or paranoid, perhaps even use it as evidence that I needed supervision. The Bali reservation receipt lay beside me on the desk. The departure date, December 20th, 5 days before Christmas, seemed both liberating and terrifying. Could I really leave everything behind? My home, my routines, my family connections, tenuous as they had become? And what about Emma and Jackson? As hurt as I was by their parents' actions, abandoning my grandchildren felt wrong. They were innocent in all this, and Emma especially would feel my absence keenly. Yet staying meant accepting a diminished role in my own life. It meant watching Marcus and Olivia gradually take over more decisions, waiting for the moment when they would present me with papers to sign, relinquishing control of the Willows for my own protection. I thought about the women suffragettes Emma and I had researched, their courage in defying expectations, their determination to claim autonomy despite societal pressure. What would they think of me now, hesitating to assert my independence because of fear and guilt? As dawn broke, casting pale light through the study windows, I found myself at a crossroads that felt both terrifying and strangely freeing. I carried my cold tea to the sink, then showered and dressed with unusual care, a tailored wool skirt, silk blouse, low heels, and the pearl earrings Thomas had given me on our 25th anniversary. Armor of a sort, for what I needed to do next. At 9 o'clock sharp, I called my longtime attorney, Patricia Winters. We'd been friends since college, and she'd handled all our legal matters for decades. "I need to see you," I said, bypassing pleasantries. "Today, if possible. It's important." The week before Thanksgiving arrived with an unseasonable cold snap. Frost etched delicate patterns on my windows each morning, and the garden I'd tended so faithfully slipped into winter dormancy. It felt symbolic somehow, a natural ending to one cycle before the beginning of another. I'd spent the days since my meeting with Patricia in careful preparation. We'd updated my will and powers of attorney, with Dr. Harriman providing thorough documentation of my mental competence. I'd also consulted with a real estate agent about the Willow's market value, though I hadn't yet decided whether to sell. What surprised me most during this period was the profound sense of liberation that came with making these preparations. Each document signed, each account secured, each plan finalized, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. On Monday morning, I received a call from my bank. "Mrs. Webb, this is Diane Mitchell from First National. I wanted to notify you that someone attempted to access your investment account online using incorrect security answers. As per our protocols, we've temporarily locked the account." My stomach tightened. Did the system show who attempted the access? The login was from an authorized user, Heather Webb Collins. But when prompted for verification, the security questions were answered incorrectly multiple times. So Heather had tried to access my investment account, the one where most of my assets were held. The account she had basic viewing rights for, but not transaction authority. At the bank that afternoon, I discovered that Heather had set up automated alerts for any withdrawals over $1,000, with notifications going to her email address. The authorization form had my signature, dated 3 weeks after Thomas's funeral, when I'd been navigating grief in a fog of prescription sleep aids. "I'd like to remove all external access to my accounts immediately," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I need to make several significant transfers today." For the next hour, Diane and I methodically restructured my financial arrangements. I transferred substantial sums to new accounts at different institutions, removed Heather's access entirely, and established new security protocols that would require in-person verification for any major changes. That evening, I sat in my sunroom, watching darkness settle over the garden. My financial independence was now secure, but a harder task remained: telling my family about my Christmas plans. The next morning, I called Michael in Seattle. As the child who lived farthest away, he was less enmeshed in the daily monitoring that Heather had established. "Mom, what a surprise," he answered. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine, Michael. I'm calling because I want to tell you something important. I won't be at Marcus's for Christmas this year. I'm going to Bali." Silence stretched across the line. Then, "Bali? As in Indonesia?" "Yes. I leave December 20th and return in February. It's something your father and I always wanted to do together." "Alone?" "Mom, is this because of what happened with Marcus?" "Heather told me about it. He was out of line, but alienating. Yourself from the family at Christmas seems extreme. This isn't about Marcus, though that situation didn't help. This is about me finally taking the trip your father and I planned for years. I'm 72, Michael. If not now, when?" The call with Heather later that day was far more difficult. "Bali?" she nearly shouted. "You can't just fly halfway around the world by yourself." "I can and I am," I replied calmly. "The arrangements are made." "Is this about the investment account? The bank called you, so she knew about the attempted access." "Yes, they did. Just as they notified you every time I made a withdrawal over $1,000 for the past 3 years, a setting I never authorized." "That was for your protection," she sputtered. "After Dad died, you were in no condition to manage things." Yet the monitoring continued long after my grief had eased. And now I discover plans to have me sign over my home to you and Marcus. Were those also for my protection? The morning of December 20th dawned clear and cold. My bags stood ready by the door, 2 suitcases containing everything I would need for my extended journey. As the taxi pulled into my driveway, I took one last walk through the willows. In each room, memories whispered. Thomas carrying me over the threshold as newlyweds, children's birthdays, holiday gatherings, quiet evenings reading by the fire. But perhaps the most important chapter was yet to be written. I locked the door, behind me, handed my luggage to the driver, and stepped into the taxi without looking back. Decision made, action taken. The rest would unfold as it would. "Airport, please," I said, my voice clear and confident. "International departures." The 16-hour flight to Denpasar, Bali, was a journey between worlds. I'd splurged on business class, another extravagance my children would have questioned, and found myself cocooned in unexpected comfort as we soared over oceans and continents. Somewhere over the Pacific, we crossed the international date line, and I lost a day of my life. A disorienting thought that somehow felt appropriate for this transition. When we began our descent into Bali, the first glimpse of the island through scattered clouds took my breath away. Emerald rice terraces cascaded down hillsides like verdant staircases. Volcanic peaks rose majestically against a cerulean sky. The landscape was so unlike the suburban American streets I'd known that it barely seemed real. Outside in the humid night air, my prearranged driver held a sign with my name, Mrs. Eleanor Webb. Not Grandma or Mom or even Ellie. Just Eleanor Webb, traveler, woman, individual. I found myself standing straighter as I approached him. "First time in Bali?" Ketut asked as we navigated evening traffic in his air-conditioned van. "Yes," I admitted. "I've waited a long time for this trip." He nodded sagely. "Best things worth waiting for, but not too long. Life short." The villa I'd rented exceeded my expectations. Nestled in the artist community of Ubud, it offered privacy while being just a short walk from local restaurants and markets. A stone path wound through tropical gardens to a traditional Balinese structure with a thatched roof and open-air living areas. A small private pool reflected moonlight, its surface occasionally rippled by falling frangipani blossoms. I slept deeply that first night, lulled by the symphony of unfamiliar sounds. geckos chirping from the rafters, distant gamelan, music, the gentle splash of tropical rain that came and went in the early morning hours. I woke to sunshine filtering through gauzy curtains and the scent of jasmine drifting through open windows. A young woman named Wyan had arrived silently to prepare breakfast, which she served on the veranda overlooking a small ravine where palm trees swayed in the morning breeze. Fresh tropical fruits, some I didn't recognize, arranged in a rainbow pattern. A pot of rich Balinese coffee, banana pancakes with palm sugar syrup. After breakfast, I finally steeled myself to check messages. Heather had progressed from concerned to frantic in her texts, culminating in, "Flight landed hours ago. Why haven't you checked in? Do we need to contact authorities?" I sent a brief response. "Arrived safely. Villa is beautiful. Will call when I can." Then I silenced notifications and slipped the phone into a drawer. Ketut arrived as promised, and we spent the day exploring Ubud, the sacred monkey forest with its mischievous inhabitants, the royal palace with its ornate carvings, the bustling market where I purchased a flowing batik dress in shades of turquoise and emerald, colors I would never have worn at home. "You look 10 years younger already," Ketut observed when I emerged from a shop wearing my new purchase. I laughed. "It's the tropical air," he shook his head. "No is freedom. I see many Western people come to Bali. Some carry heavy burdens, even on vacation. You arrived with burdens, but now—" He made a releasing gesture with his hands. "You letting go." His perception startled me. Was my transformation so visible? As Christmas Eve approached, Ketut invited me to join his family for a traditional celebration. "Not same as American Christmas," he warned, "but special still." I accepted, gratefully. The alternative was spending the holiday alone with memories and regrets. That evening, surrounded by Ketut's family, people who had known me for mere days yet welcomed me with genuine warmth, I felt something shift inside me. Not the absence of my family's familiar presence, but the presence of something new, possibility. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I was fully present in my own life. Not as someone's mother or grandmother or widow, but simply as Eleanor, a woman with adventures still ahead and the courage to embrace them. Christmas Day in Bali dawned with an intensity of color that seemed almost supernatural. The sky a deep, saturated blue, the foliage an impossible emerald, flowers blooming in vibrant hues that put my garden at home to shame. Even the air felt different, heavy with moisture and the sweet scent of incense from morning offerings. Ketut collected me early, dressed more formally than usual in a traditional sarong and headdress. "Temple first," he explained as we drove, through streets already bustling with activity. "Very special ceremony today. Good blessing for your journey." The temple complex sprawled across terraced grounds, ancient stone carvings partially reclaimed by moss and lichen. Women in bright ceremonial dress balanced elaborate offerings on their heads, moving with practiced grace. Men gathered in groups, their voices creating a pleasant murmur against the occasional chime of bells. As Ketut helped me don a borrowed sash, required for entering sacred spaces, an older man approached, his English crisp with a British colonial accent. "Another Western refugee, I see," he said, extending his hand. "Harold Whitmore, 15 Christmases in Bali and counting." "Eleanor Webb," I replied, shaking his hand. "First Christmas here. Won't be the last, mark my words. There's something about this place that gets under your skin." He studied me with kind eyes. Running from something or running toward something? The directness of his question startled me. "Is it that obvious?" He chuckled. "Only to those who've made similar journeys. Most Westerners our age don't suddenly appear in Bali on Christmas Day without a story." "Both, I suppose," I admitted. "Running from expectations that no longer fit." running toward whatever time I have left. Harold nodded as if this made perfect sense. Family back home having conniptions, I imagine? To put it mildly. They'll survive, he said with the confidence of experience. Might even learn something valuable about you and themselves in the process. The ceremony was a blur of unfamiliar rituals. Flower petals pressed to my forehead, holy water sprinkled from ornate vessels, prayers in a language I couldn't understand, but whose cadence felt somehow soothing. Throughout it all, Harold remained, nearby, occasionally translating or explaining cultural nuances. Afterward, Ketut drove us to a restaurant overlooking terraced rice fields, where a table on a private deck awaited. Harold was joined by his friend Judith, an Australian artist who had built a home in Ubud 20 years earlier. 3 other expatriates completed our group, a retired professor from Canada, a widow from Denmark, and a former corporate lawyer from New York, who now ran meditation retreats. "Welcome to the Escape Committee," Judith said, raising her glass in toast. "Those of us who chose to rewrite the final chapters on our own terms." The meal stretched for hours, conversations flowing as freely as the local palm wine. These strangers becoming friends, shared their stories openly. Marriages ended through death or divorce, children grown distant or overly dependent, careers concluded or transformed. Each had come to Bali seeking something different, yet each spoke of finding unexpected freedom and connection in this place so far from their origins. "My son didn't speak to me for 8 months after I sold the family home," the Canadian professor, George, confided. Claimed I was erasing his childhood by selling to strangers. Never mind that he'd visited exactly twice in the decade since he moved to Toronto. "My daughter was convinced I'd lost my mind," Judith added. "Sent a psychologist to evaluate me when I announced I was moving to Bali permanently at 65. Now she visits every year with my grandchildren." "The children view our homes and possessions as their birthright," Harold observed, "as if our lives are merely prolonged storage facilities for their inheritance." These casual revelations stunned me. Here were people who had faced the same struggles I was navigating, who had made similar choices and survived the fallout. Their presence around this table, vital, engaged, unapologetic in their self-determination, was the validation I hadn't known I needed. As the afternoon waned, Harold asked the question I'd been dreading. "So, Eleanor, what's your plan after Bali? Back to family obligations and the status quo?" 6 pairs of eyes turned to me, curious, but not judgmental. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've booked 6 weeks here, but everything beyond that is uncertain." The Danish woman, Ingrid, smiled. "Uncertainty is underrated. Some of life's best chapters begin with, 'I don't know.'" When Ketut dropped me at my villa that evening, I was laden with phone numbers, invitations, and recommendations for local experiences. "New friends good?" he asked. "Wonderful," I assured him. "Thank you for introducing us." "I think you find your people," he said with satisfaction. "Important at any age, but especially your time of life." My people. The phrase lingered as I prepared. For bed. These expatriates and travelers weren't replacing my family, but they offered a different kind of connection, one based on mutual respect and shared experience rather than obligation or habit. I checked my phone before sleeping and found the expected flurry of Christmas messages, photos of Emma and Jackson opening presents, a stiff family portrait around Marcus's perfectly decorated tree, a voicemail from Michael that began cheerfully enough but ended with a pointed comment about his children asking where Grandma was. The guilt these messages might have triggered felt strangely muted now, not absent, but less consuming. I sent brief responses, warm Christmas wishes, compliments on the lovely photos, promises to call soon. Then I silenced the phone again. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a pleasant blur of exploration and new experiences. Harold became my unofficial cultural guide, helping me navigate local customs and introducing me to his extensive network of expatriates and locals. Judith invited me to her art studio, where she taught me basic techniques for capturing Bali's landscapes in watercolor. George accompanied me to ancient temple ruins, providing historical context that no guidebook could match. On New Year's Eve, they insisted I join them at a beachfront celebration in Sanur. Tables were set directly on the sand, lanterns swaying gently in the warm breeze. The ocean stretched before us, its darkness punctuated by the lights of fishing boats and distant islands. As midnight approached, Harold raised his glass. "To Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying over the murmur of conversation, "who had the courage to choose herself when it mattered most." The others joined the toast, their faces warm with genuine affection despite our brief acquaintance. In that moment, surrounded by people who asked nothing of me but my company, I felt a profound sense of belonging. The fireworks that exploded over the ocean minutes later seemed to mirror my internal state. Bright bursts of joy, unexpected patterns, of possibility, the darkness between filled with anticipation rather than fear. With the new year came new challenges. A series of increasingly distressed messages from Heather culminated in the news that she and Marcus were planning to visit Bali to check on me in mid-January. Michael had apparently contributed to their airfare, convinced by their accounts that I was experiencing some sort of breakdown. "They can't just show up here," I told Harold over coffee at his hillside villa. "This is my journey, not a family intervention opportunity." "Then don't let it become one," he replied pragmatically. "They may book tickets, but you control whether you see them. This villa isn't a prison. You can be elsewhere when they arrive." "Run away again, you mean?" "Not running away. Making a choice about your boundaries." He leaned forward. "Eleanor, have you considered that this might be exactly what you needed? A family confrontation in Bali? Hardly. No. The chance to establish new terms for your relationship on neutral territory. Back home, you were surrounded by the weight of history. Here, you're just Eleanor, strong, independent, surrounded by supporters who see you clearly." He smiled. "Perhaps they need to meet this version of you." His perspective shifted something in my thinking. Perhaps this unexpected challenge wasn't something to dread, but an opportunity to solidify the transformation that had begun with my decision to leave. The next day, I received an email from Patricia, my attorney. Marcus had contacted her, expressing grave concerns about my mental state and questioning the recent changes to my financial arrangements. Patricia had rebuffed him professionally, but wanted me to know about the attempted incursion. I wasn't surprised, but the knowledge that they were actively trying to undermine my autonomy even from a distance strengthened my resolve. I replied to Patricia, confirming that I remained competent and committed to my decisions, then drafted a direct email to Marcus and Heather. "I understand you're planning to visit Bali. While I appreciate your concern, I want to be clear that this journey is something I've chosen deliberately. I am well, I am happy, and I am making decisions that honor this stage of my life. If you wish to visit as respectful adults reconnecting with their mother, you are welcome. If you're coming to check on me or convince me to return to the role I've left behind, please reconsider. This is not a negotiation. It is a declaration of how things will be going forward." I stared at the screen for a long time before pressing send, aware that these boundaries were unlike any I'd established before. The old Eleanor would have softened the message, made allowances, prioritized their comfort over my needs. But that Eleanor had flown halfway around the world to find herself. I wouldn't dishonor that journey now. Their responses arrived within hours. Heather's was emotional, hurt and confusion, poorly disguised as concern. Marcus's was coldly formal, insisting that they were simply worried about my welfare given my erratic decisions and susceptibility to influence. I forwarded both messages to Harold, who had become my unexpected confidant. His reply made me laugh out loud. Translation: "How dare you have a life that doesn't revolve around us? The audacity of finding happiness without our permission." Indeed, the audacity of happiness, of self-determination, of saying this is mine about my life after decades of sharing it freely, sometimes at considerable personal cost. As January unfolded in a rhythm of exploration, new friendships, and quiet self-discovery, I found myself increasingly comfortable with this audacity. The challenges from home, financial manipulations, emotional pressure, attempts to pathologize my independence, only strengthened my conviction that I had made the right choice. By the time their scheduled arrival date approached, I had found my footing. Whatever came next, I would face it as this new version of myself, Eleanor Webb, no longer defined primarily by her family roles, but by her own choices and desires. Heather and Marcus arrived in Bali on January 15th, jet-lagged and visibly uncomfortable, in the tropical heat. I waited for them in the open-air lobby of their resort, neutral territory, as Harold had suggested. My heart hammered against my ribs as I spotted them emerging from their taxi, but I maintained the outward calm I'd practiced. For this moment. "Mom!" Heather called, hurrying toward me. "Thank God you're okay." I accepted her embrace, noting the genuine relief in her voice. Whatever mixed motives had brought her here, concern for my well-being was at least part of the equation. Marcus approached more cautiously, his expression a careful mask. "Eleanor," he greeted me with a stiff nod. "You're looking tanned." "The Balinese sun agrees with me," I replied. "Welcome to the island. I hope your flight wasn't too difficult." This stilted exchange set the tone for our first hours together. Superficial, pleasantries overlaying deep currents of tension. I had arranged for Ketut to give them a brief tour of Ubud after they settled into their rooms, providing time for them to acclimate while I prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation. That evening, over dinner at a restaurant I'd specifically chosen for its public setting, Marcus finally broached the real purpose of their visit. "Mom," he began, using the familial term for the first time since their arrival, "we need to discuss your situation." "My situation seems quite pleasant at the moment," I replied, gesturing to the beautiful garden surrounding our table. "But I'm happy to discuss anything specific you have in mind." Heather jumped in, her voice pitched low. "This isn't like you, Mom. Flying off to Indonesia alone, cutting off communication, changing your financial arrangements without telling us. We're worried." "I didn't cut off communication," I corrected gently. "I've sent regular updates and responded to messages. As for the financial changes, those were necessary after I discovered unauthorized monitoring of my accounts." Marcus flushed. "That's completely mischaracterizing what happened. Heather was helping you manage your finances after Dad died, with your permission. Viewing accounts to assist me is one thing. Setting up alerts for every significant withdrawal and attempting to access my investment portfolio without my knowledge is quite another." "You weren't thinking clearly," Heather insisted. "The renovation, this spontaneous trip, it's not rational behavior for someone in your position." "My position?" I raised an eyebrow. "You mean as a widow? As a grandmother? Or simply as a woman past 70 who's expected to quietly fade into the background of other people's lives?" The waiter arrived with our main courses, temporarily halting the conversation. When he departed, Marcus leaned forward, his voice tight with barely contained frustration. "Look, we didn't fly halfway around the world to argue. We came because we care about you, because the children miss you, because Christmas without you was wrong." For a moment, his vulnerability disarmed me. Perhaps I had underestimated the emotional impact of my absence. Perhaps their concern, however misguided, came from a place of genuine love. "I missed the children too," I acknowledged. "But this journey was necessary for me. Can you understand?" "That? What I understand," Marcus said, his momentary softness hardening again, "is that you've been making impulsive decisions that affect the entire family. The Willows sitting empty, money being spent on extended vacations, changing your will and financial arrangements without discussion. Without discussion? I interrupted, my own composure slipping. When was I consulted about your plans to have me sign over my home to you? When did we discuss the monitoring of my finances? When did my opinion matter in any family decision in the years since Thomas died? Heather reached for my hand. Mom, you're twisting everything. We were trying to protect you. By treating me like an incompetent child? By discussing my mental capacity where Emma could overhear? By planning to replace me with Olivia's parents once you secured control of my assets? Their shocked expressions confirmed what I had suspected. They had no idea that Emma had revealed their conversations to me. The realization that their 13-year-old daughter had been their undoing seemed to hit Marcus particularly hard. Emma told you. She had no business. She had every business defending her grandmother's dignity, I cut in. She showed more respect for my autonomy than either of you have in years. For the first time since their arrival, genuine shame flickered across their faces. The carefully constructed narrative they'd built, of a confused elderly mother making irrational decisions, needing their protection, was crumbling in the face of specific revelations they couldn't deny. It wasn't like that, Heather finally said, though her protestation lacked conviction. Then tell me what it was like, I invited. Help me understand why my children, whom I supported through every life transition without question, felt entitled to control my finances, my home, and my choices without my consent. The restaurant continued its gentle hum of activity around us, waiters gliding between tables, soft music mingling with the chorus of tropical insects, other diners engaged in their own conversations. Yet at our table, time seemed suspended, as my children struggled to articulate justifications that suddenly seemed inadequate even to them. We were afraid, Heather finally admitted, her voice small. After Dad died, you were so lost. We worried about you living alone, about financial predators targeting widows, about you falling or getting sick with no one there. It started as protection, but then it became convenient, I finished for her. My independence became inconvenient to your plans. Marcus stared at his untouched dinner. You make it sound calculated. Wasn't it? The careful monitoring of my spending? The discussions about my mental competence? The plans for the Willows? I kept my voice level, more sad than angry now. You may have begun with concern, but at some point, it transformed into something else, a presumption of entitlement to what I've built. Our conversation continued long after our meals grew cold, painful truths finally emerging after years of polite fiction. There were no dramatic revelations or tearful reconciliations, just the slow, awkward process of adults attempting to recalibrate a relationship built on unexamined assumptions. By the time we returned to their resort, emotional exhaustion had replaced anger. We agreed to meet the following afternoon, giving everyone space to process. Back at my villa, I found myself simultaneously drained and oddly euphoric. For perhaps the first time in my relationship with my adult children, I had spoken my truth, without filtering it through concern for their feelings or fear of their judgment. The consequences remained to be seen, but the act itself was transformative. I called Harold, who had insisted I check in after the confrontation. You survived, I gather? He asked dryly. More than survived, I replied. I think I finally made them see me, not as a mother or grandmother who exists primarily in relation to them, but as a person with my own valid needs and boundaries. The greatest gift you could give them, he observed, even if they don't recognize it yet. The next morning, I received a text from Heather asking if she could come to my villa alone. When she arrived, her eyes were red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep, possibly both. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, she began as we sat in the garden, about when your opinion stopped mattering, about being treated like a child. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. I kept trying to justify everything, telling myself we were protecting you, that you needed guidance after Dad died. But the truth is, she paused, visibly struggling. The truth is, it was easier to make decisions for you than to include you. Easier to assume we knew best than to really listen to what you wanted. It was the closest thing to a genuine apology. I'd heard from her in years, and it loosened something tight in my chest. Thank you for acknowledging that. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted. Marcus is still angry, more at himself than at you, I think, though he wouldn't admit it. But I don't want to lose you, Mom. I don't want the children to lose you. You haven't lost me, I assured her. I'm just no longer exactly where and how you expected me to be. We talked for hours that day, with a new honesty that felt both painful and healing. I explained my need for independence, for experiences, beyond family obligations. She shared her fears about my safety and financial security, which were genuine even if her methods had been misguided. When Marcus joined us the following day, the conversation was more difficult, but equally necessary. His pride made genuine, apology nearly impossible, but he listened, really listened, when I explained how his treatment had diminished me. By the time they prepared to return home 3 days later, we had reached an uneasy truce built on new boundaries and reluctant respect. So what happens now? Heather asked as we said goodbye at the airport. Will you come home when your 6 weeks are up? Home is a complicated concept now, I replied. The Willows will always be there, and I'll return eventually. But first, there are other places I need to see, other experiences waiting. Thomas and I had plans, you know. I think it's time I honored them. She nodded, a new understanding in her eyes. Just stay in touch? Let us know you're okay? I promise, I said, embracing her. And tell Emma her grandmother is having the adventure of a lifetime. As their plane disappeared into the cloudless Balinese sky, I felt a curious lightness. The external response I'd feared, judgment, manipulation, conflict, had come and gone. I had weathered it without surrendering. My newfound autonomy, whatever happened next, would unfold on terms I had helped establish. That evening, my expatriate friends gathered at my villa for dinner, eager to hear about the family confrontation. As I recounted the difficult conversations and tentative resolution, Judith raised her glass. To Eleanor, she toasted, who taught her children that even mothers deserve to be seen as full human beings, with dreams and desires of their own. She smiled warmly. It's a lesson that will echo through generations. I hadn't considered that perspective, that my reclaiming of self might someday benefit Emma or even her future children. That this painful recalibration of family dynamics might create space for more authentic relationships across generations. It was, perhaps, the most meaningful legacy I could leave. As January melted into February, Bali continued to work its subtle magic on me. Each day brought new discoveries, hidden temples nestled among rice terraces, secret beaches accessible only by winding footpaths, vibrant markets filled with treasures I couldn't have imagined. But the most profound discoveries were internal, unfolding in quiet moments of reflection. The morning of my 70th week on the island, I woke before dawn and carried a cup of ginger tea to the small pavilion overlooking my villa's garden. A light rain had fallen overnight, leaving everything glistening and intensifying the already intoxicating scents of frangipani and jasmine. As I watched darkness gradually yield to the first blush of sunrise, I felt a deep stillness settle within me. The Eleanor who had arrived in Bali, defensive, hurt, determined to prove something, had gradually transformed into someone more at peace with both her past and her future. The anger that had fueled my initial escape had burned away, leaving clarity in its place. Later that morning, Harold joined me for our now regular coffee ritual at a cafe overlooking the Kampuhan Ridge. At 78, he moved with the deliberate grace of someone who had learned to work with his body's limitations rather than fighting them. His eyes, however, remained sharp with intelligence and the particular wisdom that comes only from living fully through the decades. "You're looking contemplative today," he observed, stirring honey into his coffee. "Anniversary of some sort?" "In a way," I replied. "It's been 7 weeks since I arrived. My original booking ends next week." "Ah." He nodded, understanding. "Decision." Time approaches. Indeed it did. My visa could be extended, the villa rental renewed, or I could move on, to the other destinations in Thomas's and my travel folder, or back to the Willows and the complicated family dynamics I'd temporarily escaped. "I've been thinking about something you said when we first met," I told him. "About running from something versus running toward something." He smiled, remembering. "And where do you stand on that question now?" I paused, organizing, thoughts that had been coalescing for weeks. I think I needed to run away first, to create enough distance to see clearly what I'd been accepting as normal. The constant monitoring, the subtle undermining, the expectation that I would center my existence around everyone else's needs. Harold nodded encouragement. "But now," I continued, "I find myself running toward something instead. Not just experiences or places, but a way of being that honors who I am at this stage of life." "And who is that?" he asked softly. The question hung between us, profound in its simplicity. Who was I, stripped of the roles that had defined me for decades? "I'm still discovering her," I admitted. "But I know she's someone who values her independence. Someone who finds joy in beauty and new experiences. Someone who can love her family deeply without being diminished by them." I smiled, feeling the truth of my words as I spoke them. "Someone who isn't finished growing yet." Harold reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. "The greatest tragedy of aging isn't wrinkles or aching joints. It's the belief that we're done becoming, that our most significant transformations are behind us." His words resonated with a conversation I'd had with Thomas in what would be the final year of his life. We'd been discussing retirement plans, and I'd expressed anxiety about losing my professional identity after decades as an accountant. "You're not just an accountant, Ellie," he'd said with characteristic gentleness. "That's something you do, not who you are. Who you are is still unfolding." At the time, I'd dismissed it as Thomas's usual optimism. Now, thousands of miles from the life we'd shared, I recognized the profound truth in his words. We never finish becoming who we are. That evening, I video-called Emma as I'd been doing weekly since my confrontation with her parents. Her face brightened the screen, her bedroom visible in the background, posters of young musicians I didn't recognize, shelves crowded with books and sports trophies, the organized chaos of early adolescence. "Grandma, guess what? I made the debate team, and I'm using the research techniques you showed me for my arguments." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, genuinely proud. "You've always had a gift for articulating your thoughts clearly, Mom." "Says I get that from you," she replied, then lowered her voice conspirationally. "She talks about you differently now, you know. Not like you're someone who needs managing, but like you're your own person or something." I laughed at her phrasing, though the observation touched me deeply. "Well, that's progress, I suppose. She told Dad they need to respect your journey the other day." He made a face but didn't argue. Emma grinned. "It's kinda cool, actually. Like you're teaching them something even from far away." Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. Perhaps the greatest gift I could offer my children at this stage wasn't financial security or child care assistance, but the example of a woman refusing to disappear into the background of her own life. "So when are you coming home?" Emma asked, the question I'd been expecting. "Not that I'm not super jealous of all your amazing photos and everything, but I miss you." "I miss you too," I said truthfully, "and I will come home. Eventually. But first, I think I have a few more places to visit." Her eyes widened. You're going somewhere else? Where? I shared my evolving plans. New Zealand next, then perhaps Japan in the spring for cherry blossom season. Places from Thomas's and my travel. Folder, dreams deferred but not forgotten. Can I come visit you somewhere? She asked eagerly. Maybe during summer break? Mom said maybe, if you were okay with it. The offer stunned me. Not just Emma's desire to join my journey, but Heather's willingness to consider it. Another small indication that something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. I would love that, I told her, meaning it completely. After our call ended, I sat in my garden listening to the night sounds of Bali, distant gamelan music, geckos chirping from the rafters, the gentle rustle of palm fronds in the evening breeze. A profound sense of gratitude washed over me for this unexpected chapter of my life. 7 weeks ago, I had boarded a plane feeling like I was burning bridges behind me. Now I understood that I had actually been building new ones, not just to distant places, but to a more authentic version of myself. The next morning, I met with Judith at her studio, where she was helping me create a watercolor series capturing my Balinese experiences. My artistic skills were modest at best, but under her patient guidance, I'd produced a few paintings that genuinely pleased me. Representations not just of what I'd seen, but how I'd felt seeing it. As we worked side by side, she asked casually, "Have you decided? Staying longer or moving on?" "Moving on, I think," I replied, carefully adding shadows to my rendering of a temple doorway. "It feels right to continue the journey." She nodded approval. "The first step away is the hardest. After that, each new horizon calls a little more clearly." She studied her own canvas critically. "When Harold told me about you, this American grandmother who'd fled her family at Christmas to reclaim her life, I thought you might be one of those temporary revolutionaries." Temporary revolutionaries? Oh, you know the type. They make a dramatic stand, enjoy the adrenaline of defiance, then gradually drift back to the same patterns when the initial fire burns out. She smiled. "But you're not that, are you? This isn't a phase or a reaction. It's a reclamation." A reclamation. The word felt exactly right for what I'd been experiencing, not a rejection of my past or roles, but a reclaiming of parts of myself that had been gradually surrendered to others. Expectations. That evening, I began organizing my belongings, deciding what to take to New Zealand and what to send home. Among the items I'd brought from the Willows was a small leather-bound journal Thomas had given me on our 45th anniversary, inscribed with words from Thoreau. "Go confidently in the direction of your dreams. Live the life you have imagined." Had filled only the first few pages before his death, then set it aside as grief consumed my energy for reflection. Now, I opened to a fresh page and began to write. Not about the past or lost opportunities, but about the integration of who I had been with who I was becoming. I wrote about the wisdom that can only come from living through decades of joy and sorrow, love and loss. About the strange paradox of feeling simultaneously more certain of my core values, yet more open to new experiences than ever before. About the liberation that comes from releasing others' expectations while still honoring genuine connections as thine. My pen moved across the page. I realized I was creating something I wished I'd had years ago, a field guide to the territory of aging with dignity and purpose. Not a rejection of family bonds, but a recalibration of them based on mutual respect rather than dependency or obligation. Perhaps someday I would share these reflections with Heather and Marcus. Perhaps they would help Emma navigate her own journey through the decades. Or perhaps they were simply for me, breadcrumbs marking the path of my own transformation. As I wrote deep into the night, with the sounds of Bali enveloping my villa, I felt a profound sense of integration, past and present, loss and discovery, responsibility and freedom, all coexisting within me as essential elements of a life fully lived. The wisdom wasn't in choosing between these seeming opposites, but in embracing their necessary tension. In understanding that loving my family deeply did not require surrendering my autonomy, that honoring Thomas's memory meant living fully, not shrinking into the diminished role others had prepared for me. I closed the journal as the first hints of dawn lightened the sky. Whatever came next, whether more travels or an eventual return to the Willows, I would carry this integration with me. Not as a shield against life's complexities, but as a compass pointing toward authenticity in every chapter still to be written. 1 year after my Christmas departure for Bali, I stood on the terrace of the Willows, watching snow dust the garden Thomas and I had cultivated for decades. The Japanese maple we'd planted when Heather was born stood bare against the winter sky, its graceful branches traced with white. The renovation that had sparked so much conflict now provided a warm vantage point from which to witness the season's quiet beauty. My return home 3 months earlier hadn't been a retreat or surrender, but another deliberate choice in a year filled with them. After Bali came New Zealand's majestic landscapes, then Japan's cherry blossoms, followed by a Mediterranean cruise that Thomas and I had once dreamed about taking for our 50th anniversary. Each destination had added layers to my transformation, each departure and arrival strengthening my sense of agency. When I finally flew back to America in September, I returned not as the same woman who had fled, but as someone who had reclaimed herself piece by piece across oceans and continents. The Willows remained mine, not signed over to Marcus and Heather as they had once planned, but still the repository of my history and a sanctuary when I needed it. I had, however, established a trust with clear terms for its eventual transfer, removing it as a source of unspoken tension. My relationship with my children had evolved into something I wouldn't have recognized a year ago. The bitter confrontation in Bali had cleared the air, allowing something more honest to emerge. Heather called weekly, not to monitor, but to connect. Marcus remained more distant, his pride still bruised, but the manipulative attempts to control. My finances had ceased entirely. The most profound transformation, however, had been in my relationship with Emma. True to their tentative offer, Heather and Marcus had allowed her to join me for 2 weeks in New Zealand during her summer break. Those 14 days of adventure, hiking to glaciers, watching dolphins play in crystalline bays, learning about Maori culture, had created a bond that transcended the traditional grandmother-granddaughter dynamic. We had become, in some essential way, fellow travelers on life's journey. Now, as Christmas approached again, the holiday carried different meaning. I had accepted Marcus's invitation to their celebration, but on my own terms, I would join them for Christmas dinner, but maintain my independence, staying at the Willows rather than their guest room, arriving and departing on my schedule. The sound of tires on the driveway drew my attention. Harold's rental car appeared, navigating the light snow with characteristic care. His visit from Bali, timed deliberately to coincide with the anniversary of my departure, was itself evidence of how completely my life had transformed. A friendship that would have been impossible in my previous existence now enriched my days immeasurably. I welcomed him with a warm embrace, noting how easily he fit into this space that had once seemed inextricably bound to my past. The famous Willows, he said, surveying the house with appreciation. It's exactly as you described, dignified without being pretentious, historic without being dated. Rather like its owner, I hope, I replied with a smile. Later, as we sat in the study, that still held echoes of Thomas, Harold raised his glass. To 1 year of revolution, he toasted. May many more follow. I considered his words, the term revolution sitting strangely against the backdrop of my traditional home. Yet it fit. What else could you call the complete reorientation of one's existence around new principles? What else described the overthrow of expectations that had governed decades of my life? Not just revolution, I amended, evolution. Because that was the true nature of what had occurred. Not a complete rejection of my past, but a natural progression from what had been to what could be. The mother and grandmother still existed, within me, alongside the adventurer, the artist, the friend, the woman reclaiming joy in her 8th decade. On Christmas morning, I woke early, a lifetime habit that neither retirement nor travel had broken. The house was quiet, Harold still sleeping. In the guest room, I made coffee and carried it to the sunroom, where dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky. On the table lay my travel journal, now filled with a year's worth of reflections, alongside a small wrapped gift from Thomas I'd found while unpacking. A compass he must have purchased before his death, perhaps for the travels we'd planned together. The card with it, in his familiar handwriting, read simply, "For finding your way, wherever the journey leads." I held the compass, its weight solid and reassuring in my palm. Thomas could never have anticipated the particular journey I'd undertaken in his absence. Yet he had somehow provided exactly what I needed. Not just a practical tool, but a metaphor for the internal guidance that had led me here. As the sun broke over the horizon, painting the snow-covered garden in rose and gold, I felt a profound sense of peace, not the resignation I'd once mistaken for acceptance, but the genuine serenity that comes from living authentically. The year behind held adventures I could never have imagined. The year ahead promised new horizons still to be explored. And this moment, this perfect winter morning, held the quiet certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be, not defined by others' expectations or limited by my age, but fully present in my continuing journey. Whatever came next, I would face it as Eleanor Webb, complete unto myself, connected but not diminished, aging but still becoming. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.